I'm Megan Silsby. I'm a spirit specialist for Winebow. Welcome to Raising a Glass. Raising a Glass is something we're doing nationally as a Winebow team. It's a series of educational webinars and tastings. We're basically just trying to keep people connected with each other and keep each other learning and interested, and giving people something to do while they're sitting at home. Because we're all stuck at home, so you might as well drink some good rum and get your learn on. Yes. Great reason to put clothing on, So today we're talking to Kate Perry of La Maison and Velier. Kate fell in love with rum in 2011 when she opened Rumba in Seattle. I imagine that it's kind of like a getaway. You're like drinking rum and it's raining and cold outside, so seems like a good thing to do. So she ran the bar and was a rum tender for about 6 years. And then about 3 years ago, she joined La Maison and Velier and has been working with them ever since to try and heighten respect for the category of rum. She does a ton of education and is very passionate. She's been to all the distilleries multiple times, which I'm very jealous about. And today she will be talking to us about kind of some of the new stuff that's coming. She'll be talking about Clarin and Hampton estate, the production methods, history. So you guys, we're super excited to have you, Kate. And so I have most of you, or pretty much all of you, are on mute, but if you have questions, please feel free to ask questions. And yeah, we'll go ahead and get started. And this is Kate. She'll probably start out talking a little bit more about La Maison and Velier.
Yes.
Yeah.
Hi,
oh, sorry. And questions via chat.
Questions via chat.
Yeah.
Cool. I like to show video, so I'm just gonna set up a little file share. This okay. Sorry. Share screen. Am I doing it? That one. Yeah?
Yep.
Cool. Cool. Hi, guys. And great. Perfect. Hi, I'm Kate. I know I've met several of you. I'm the U.S. Market Manager for La Maison and Velier, and I'm pretty sure that I have the very best job in the world because I get to talk about incredible spirits all the time, which is really, really exciting. We launched in the U.S. market in 2018 in January, starting in New York and in California pretty quickly after in 2019 in July, or 18 in July. But La Maison and Velier has been around as a company since 2017 and as two split companies for 60 plus and 70 plus years. So the two companies together being La Maison de Whiskey out of Paris and Velier out of Italy have over 130 years of shared experience working with some of the very best spirits in the world. So it's a really kind of powerhouse dynamic to have these two European companies come together for La Maison and Velier, and it's really, really cool what's been happening in the US market. Like Megan said, I opened a bar called Rumba in Seattle back in 2012. When we opened, I think we had maybe 250 bottles on our back bar. So it was quite a big selection starting out, but the amount of bottles that were available back then, which is still pretty recently, was just nowhere near what it is today. The world of rum has really, really changed in the last 5 years or so, which is super cool. Being a bartender, pretty obsessed with rum. Everything that I turned over and the back of the bottle had a tiny word that said Velier on it. I just got really excited about, because for me it was some of the most inspiring and special bottles I'd found. And so when they called me and they said, hey, ciao, Kate, we'd like to invite you to come to Haiti to tour Clarin Distilleries. I was so excited, and I got to meet both sides of the company. And I said, if you guys ever come to the US, please let me know. I would love to be a part of it. And they said, okay. So fast forward a couple of years, and here we are about 3 years in, which is super cool. I know a lot of you have had the opportunity to taste some of our bottles, but there's a lot of cool new stuff coming to the market soon. So just sort of a run through of what we do and who we are. From the Maison de whiskey side, we represent really, really cool single cask cognac. This range is sort of inspired to reinvent the reputation of cognac for the world. In the US here, we're actually pretty lucky because we have visionaries like Charles Neal in California and Nicholas Palazzi in New York, who've really done a lot for the brandy grape spirit world. But in France, 98% of cognac is exported. Only about 2% is actually consumed in France. So most of the world's cognac is bottled by 4 companies, a blend of a lot of farmers and producers, brought down to 40% with a bunch of sugar added to it and sold to China and the US. So this is a range that's sort of designed to bring some respect for the French market and for the world back to cognac. So these are all small producers from all of the terroir. They're all single cask strength, really, really small special liquid. I think there's 250, maybe 300 bottles, if that, of each in the market. Also from Maison de Whiskey, we have their range of rum. This is an independent bottled rum. There's a lot of independent bottlers in Europe. They did a lot in the history of rum consumption to sort of elevate the category, as they did in the Scotch whiskey category as well. So Maison de Whiskey acts as an independent bottler in this situation, where they're buying liquid off of a kind of a brokerage platform of rum. So they're buying this off of a third-party brokerage, but they're telling you exactly what's in the bottle. So they tell you where it was aged, how it was aged, all of the information about it. So coming up soon, we have these 5 new ones. There's a Fiji as well. So Jamaica, Panama, a small batch Trinidad, and Australia. I think that this might be one of the first Australian rums launched in the US, which is super exciting. I've been getting a lot of questions and feedback about it. I don't have an ETA for those bottles, the world being as it is, but I do have some single casks being bottled. California is getting one, the Drink Smarter, Not Harder, which I love, Matt. There's one for Texas and one for Chicago. So if any of you guys are in those markets, look for these really cool single casks. There's nothing added to them, no coloring, no sugar, no. Habitazione Velier is a range designed by my Italian boss, Luca Gargano, to really elevate the category of rum and kind of stretch the boundaries a little bit from where it is to where he and we believe the category of rum should be. In the Caribbean, there's hundreds and hundreds of different bottles, different brands. It's really, really confusing to understand exactly who does what. If you guys grab a bottle of rum off of your back bar, spin it around, and you may or may not be able to understand who actually distilled the liquid. A lot of times there's just very little information about where the rum came from. You can see that these bottles are pretty much the exact opposite. But in all of those hundreds and hundreds of bottles of rum that you can find and that are available, there's maybe about 50-ish distilleries in the Caribbean that produce it all. So what happens is in the history of rum, which is unlike a lot of spirit categories, where the rum is produced in the Caribbean, it's shipped unaged over to Europe and it's aged in Europe, which is why Transcontinental is so cool, that it's giving you all the information about where it was aged. But out of those 50-ish distilleries, only about 18, maybe 20 still have pot still distillation. So the distilleries that are rooted back in 18th century traditions are still using pot stills, where a lot of the more modern distilleries have ripped them out or just implemented column still distillation, which is quite different. When you're talking about pot still distillation, you're talking about the intensity of flavor, of character, full, rich, heavy bodied rums. So of those 50 distilleries, about 18 still have pot stills. So that's something that's kind of rare, and that's something that should absolutely be celebrated. So Habitation Velier is a range of rum that celebrates pot still distillation. The first release that we had in the US was all from the Caribbean. This release we have a little bit outside of the Caribbean, which is super fun. So coming hopefully soon. Again, I don't know when because the world is upside down crazy. We have some rum from Worthy Park. They're 2009, a little bit older than what we had. This one's aged 11 years. From Hampton Estate, we have LROK, which is a little bit funkier than what we had with LFCH. This is the oldest rum that exists at Hampton Estate, which we'll go into later. But being 10 years old, this bottle is super special. And then we have Privateer, which I'm super excited about because I'm a huge fan of Maggie Campbell's. She's absolutely brilliant. She has a little distillery in Ipswich, Massachusetts, and they produce absolutely beautiful liquid. So this is the first time that Habitation Velier has had a North American distiller release. And it's the first time that Privateer has been bottled in a bottle outside of their typical bottlings. So this is a range that's done in partnership with distilleries. So Velier isn't an independent bottler, but they're a dependent bottler because everything is co-created. So Hampton considers these official bottlings. This is an official bottle of Privateer. It just lives in this range of the research of pot still distillation to showcase how special that is. We have a couple of unaged expressions that are coming to the market as well. Maybe some of you guys got to try Savannah, HERR, which is incredibly funky. It's super just wild and crazy. It's from Reunion Island. It's the high ester Reunion Rum release. I think 550 maybe bottles. I wish that we had more so everybody could try it. But about 550 bottles made it to the US. So I hope some of you guys got to taste it. And then we have an unaged rum from Privateer and an unaged rum from Hampton. I'm really excited to try that unaged El Rock next to the aged El Rock. I think that's going to be super cool. The Privateer, because Maggie's distribution is has been pretty limited in the past. The aged Privateer tastes pretty typical of Privateer. She really wanted it to be something that was familiar to the distillery, since it might be a lot of people's first experience with the distillery. And then the unaged is a little bit wilder, a little bit more kind of funky pot stilly. So I'm really, really excited about these when they get here. Again, who knows when that will be, but I hope it's very soon. You guys have had the Palenqueros in the market for a little bit, but we have a small company based in Oaxaca called Palenqueros. This is a project that we set up sort of as a co-op. So all of these producers are partners in the company. They all are completely involved. They get a margin of sales. And this is a range to showcase really beautiful mezcal from several areas. I love that the producers their faces are on the labels, so there's absolutely no question about who produced this liquid, where it came from. I live in my rum hole, so the world of mezcal is pretty new to me, but I find it very confusing to understand exactly who is a producer, who is a bottler, very much like the world of rum. So I love that this is very straightforward. This is the mezcal of this man. Mulisano is a really incredible vermouth that we get to work with. It's produced by a distillery called Bordiga, which is in Cuneo, up in Piedmont of Italy. They've been producing vermouth since 1888. And because Cuneo is on the trade route between Genoa and Paris, there was a lot of travelers going back and forth. So they would come into the port city of Genoa and go up to Paris. So the foot traffic on this route was always very strong, which instigated small apothecaries to start popping up on this trade route so that the travelers had amenities. So all of these little apothecaries would have specialized vermouth recipes for them. Vermouth being aromatized wine so that it would travel better. It was infused in stronger alcohol and aromatic, so it would last longer on the foot. And so Bordiga has been producing Mulisano for the apothecary Mulisano since the very, very early 1900s. Mulisano was sort of the one that made it big. So where they would have had, I think, over 200 recipes for all of these little apothecaries, Mulisano still exists today. They moved to Turin. They're still there. You can go there and you can drink vermouth Mulisano at the cafe. They're very famous for the sort of beatnik artist, musician hangout of that era. And it just sort of became economically not feasible to produce a range of vermouth for one small cafe. And so Bordiga said, hey, Velier, what if you took global distribution of Mulisano so that we can keep producing this very, very historic 200-year-old recipe? I got to go visit Bordiga a couple months ago with Angelo Canessa, who's Velier's mixology expert. He's one of my favorite humans, and he drove me from Genoa all the way up to Luca's warehouse, and then we went up to Cuneo and saw Bordiga, and it completely blew my mind. They still use all of the same practices that they always have. Their attention to sourcing the very best raw material is incredible. They make distillates and maceration of every single botanical, blend it to spec. So a single bottle can take over 45 days to make. So it's really, really special liquid. That Bianco is my favorite. Make a Presidente or a reverse Presidente with it. It absolutely sings. Clarin, which we're going to go into much deeper today, is a company that we started back in 2012, back in Haiti. So the Spirit of Haiti is the name of the company. It's in Port-au-Prince. It's a partnership between La Maison de Whiskey, Velier, and a family in Haiti, the Lingues, with partnerships of 4 producers who produce a spirit called Clarin. We have in the market right now Saint-Just Laval and La Roche. Casimir should be coming back soon as the world permits. And then we have a couple of really cool single casks coming to the US as well. I know Gino just had one released in California super recently. I haven't gotten to taste it yet, so I hope he saves me a bottle. Right, Gino?
I got you.
Yeah. We have a couple more coming in the next wave of single casks, and then those are all kind of for specific accounts to say thank you or as a partnership. And then Luca was kind enough to let me select 3 casks, which are coming as well. And I went for 3 Oloroso sherry casks. So they're quite bigger. There's 600 bottles or so per. And I have a row of 3 of them. So Saint-Just Laval and Casimir, all aged in Oloroso casks. So there's not going to be a whole lot of it, but I hope that everybody gets to taste it because it's very, very cool.
Okay, there's a few questions. Do you want to get into them before we get to Hampton, or you want to wait?
Let me go through these bottles and then we'll take a few questions.
Perfect.
And then we can go.
Cool.
So then the other thing that I feel so lucky to get to wake up every morning and talk about, I'm sorry I was a little bit late. I was just on a another Zoom session with Christelle Harris from Hampton Estate, who I absolutely adore. But we also have the global distribution of Hampton Estate, which we're going to talk about in depth in a few minutes. But that being the 46% and the 60%. There's a little bit of that label change coming on the 46% where it says aged 8 years. It's always been 8 years old, but from the time of printing the labels to actually bottling the liquid, it changed from 7 years to 8 years. So it says aged 8 years across it. The overproof at 60%, same liquid. And then in September, we're getting the Great House, which I don't say this lightly, and you guys who know me know that I really love rum, but this might be my favorite rum in the world. That Great House, it's so good. I'm really, really excited to getting it. It's just, man, you sip it and it's just iconically Hampton Estate. It's really, really incredible. And then we have another little distillery on the island of Marie Gallant called Rum. And it's a project between Luca and Gianni Capovilla, and they produce really, really beautiful juice distillate distilled in a pot still. And so they just opened their second project, which should be coming to the US market soon as time allows. But that will be called, oops, I didn't put it in here. That will be called Providence. Let me just grab a picture real quick for you. And that is a project, let me see. So that's a project of Luca and Capo. Can you guys see that? I can share it again. Sorry. Here, this one. That work?
Beautiful.
Cool. So Providence is a brand new project that is coming to the US this year. The distillery is called Distillery of Casimir. It's at the same kind of family compound that Spirit of Haiti is at, but it's not a Clarin, it's a rum. And so this is brand new coming to the market. These are the first drops that came off of the still. So it's super, super exciting. I absolutely love the label. It should be probably around the same price point as Clarin, so pretty affordable. Absolutely able to mix with, make drinks. I got to taste a little bit of it in London last year. Absolutely lovely, really, really brilliant.
Okay.
Yeah.
While you're on this, unless you're going to go over it in a little bit, can you kind of just go over the difference between rum and Chlorine, or like the big differences, unless you're going to do it later?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that we're going to talk about Clarin pretty in depth. So maybe in a little bit, it'll make a little bit more sense. This is produced from sugarcane juice and syrup. Because the concrystalline, which we'll talk about in a little bit, is so beautiful, Luca really wanted the distillate of concrystalline. Capovilla is a producer of grappa and fruit spirits, and he's really a druid. He's so highly skilled in finding the most beautiful, perfect raw material, like the perfect apricot or the world's most beautiful pear, and distilling out the soul of it. And so this is sort of an eau de vie or a fruit spirit of sugarcane, of the concrystalline sugarcane specifically. So it's a first distillate of crystalline from Sajus. So he's distilling it once on his pot still. That's being brought down to Port-au-Prince. And then there's syrup being made there as well. That's being brought down to Port-au-Prince. The two are blended and redistilled together. So it's a little bit different than Clarin, which we're going to talk about a lot in a little bit. So it's kind of a whole new thing. So they call it rum, as not to steal the identity and traditions of Clarin. Questions before we jump into Hampton Estate?
Yeah. Jan Warren wants to know who your favorite colleague in the United States is. Oh, wait, Jan, you're on here. Come on.
Hi guys, this is Jen Warren.
That's not the question I asked. The question I asked was, why is Jan Warren your favorite?
Oh, why?
In the United States?
Why?
Why?
It's a why question. I even got the question wrong.
Hi Jan, I haven't seen you in a long time.
I know,
Guys,
it's amazing.
Jan Warren. He manages New York for us, so he's my only colleague.
There you go. Yay.
And then with the Habitation Velier, Chris would like to know what your opinion on of aged Clarin still being considered Clarin.
What? The Habitation Velier?
No,
I
there
don't
was
know, just Clarin. I thought he had an HV question earlier, but I missed it.
Yeah, we're gonna talk about that in a little bit as well.
Yeah.
the question about Maison, or about Habitation was if they're considered official bottlings, how come some of the earlier Habitation Velier bottles still have the same name, have the same still name like Forsyth or Mueller?
So in the US, those bottles were done in a very, very early stages of the partnership. The first bottles that came out, Luca kind of set aside and bottled in 750 because he knew that in the future he would want them. So those would have been pretty early releases in the European market, even if they're pretty new releases in the US market because they were bottled back in 2015. When they were bottled, Luca and Worthy Park didn't know each other as well as they do now. And so when Luca said, hey, we want to celebrate your pot still, what do you think about this project? They said, okay, but you know, they were launching their brand Worthy Park. Maybe it would be confusing. They didn't quite understand. And then as the relationship progressed, they got to know each other a lot better. And so now it's bottled at Worthy Park, labeled at Worthy Park. Everything is done there. It's bottled at Privateer. Everything is done there. It will be bottled at Hampton when the bottling line is fixed or added so that they're able to do that. But it's sort of a progression of relationship. So if you look at the new Worthy Parks, they say Worthy Park. The new Mount Gay, where it used to say last word, now says Mount Gay. So it's the progression of the relationship.
Yeah, that's makes it even better.
Yeah.
Okay. I think that's
Clarin
all the
question, we'll talk about that in a little bit. But yeah. Anything else?
There was one other, Kate. Somebody asked if of the clear Habitation, if they are ever rested or if they're always just bottled pretty much after distillation.
I don't believe that they're rested. I believe that they're bottled right after distillation. Maybe in the time of shipment and waiting for the dry materials to arrive to different countries, but yeah. Cool. Jan, anything to add? I didn't know you were going to be on here. This is so exciting.
No. I mean, as usual, you're nailing this 100%. Basically, I learned from you anyway. So what am I going to add that you haven't said already?
So
The other questions, Kate, were around like the new releases that you mentioned being available in the US, like ETA.
the world is such a crazy place, guys. Everything went upside down. I came to South Africa for a wedding about 45 days ago, and now I just live here. The world is so upside down. I really don't know what is time anymore.
Never existed in the first place. It's okay.
Right? Yeah, they were supposed to be released April, May. Obviously, that's quite delayed. I don't have an ETA for anything because it's just sort of gonna take the time that needs to be.
The message is appreciate what we have now, which is 3 Clarins, 2 Hamptons, and many other things.
All right.
So enjoy what we have now, right?
Yes.
Are we getting into Clarin now or more Hampton?
We're gonna jump into some Hampton now.
All right, cool.
Let me find the right one, sorry. This one. So, Hampton Estate.
I also just realized I have a piece of Haitian art above my head right now. Whoops,
Do you?
where's that?
Did you buy that in Haiti?
Yeah, I brought it back.
Awesome. Gino got to come to Haiti with us last year, 2019.
No, 2 years ago, 18 July.
Oh God.
Where does
Which was
time
amazing.
go?
Yeah. Super cool. When we talk about Clarin, I want to hear your thoughts and your memories and share some stories. We had such a good time. From current slide. So, Hampton Estate is just, it's such a special place, a special distillery. Jan was just down there. So Jan, if you want to jump in, please feel free. I was just down there a couple months ago as well. My first time down there was 2015, I believe. And I was on this tour of Jamaica, visiting all of the distilleries on a press trip that I really had no business being on, with all of these really incredible journalists and figureheads in rum. And we went to all of the distilleries, and I could still remember what it felt like to walk into Hampton Estate years later. And I just went back a couple months ago in January, and it was all of that and just so much better. Hampton Estate it really should be like a UNESCO site of World Heritage for rum and for distillation. A lot of people have never heard of Hampton Estate, and even if you go to Jamaica, a lot of places don't know what Hampton Estate is, because the important part about the distillery is that you have to understand that in the past, the history of rum isn't like it is today, where you have distilleries that have brands that sell their brands to the market. That connection didn't exist. If you were to go back to very early Caribbean, there would have been hundreds of distilleries on the islands, and all of these distilleries would have sugarcane fields. They would have sugarcane manufacturing to produce sugar attached to it, sugar factories, and then they would have a distillery that would take care of the waste product. There's a sort of misnomer in the world of rum that, sugar came first. They saw some molasses fermenting on a dock somewhere and thought, oh gee, we can distill that. This is utter poppycock. The Dutch were heavily involved in the Caribbean. They knew exactly what they were doing, being the foremost experts of distillation. The two things were always produced simultaneously. And so if you went to the Caribbean islands, there would be hundreds of distilleries on each island producing as much sugar and as much rum as possible and shipping this out to Europe. So Europe had the biggest wealth at this point that they had ever seen. It was a very crazy gluttonous time to be in England and Great Britain, where the center of these islands were. Imagine being in England and having sugar for the first time and then having it being readily available. Tea was largely consumed in Great Britain when tea was largely consumed. But when sugar was added, all of a sudden the consumption of tea went crazy through the roof because people got such a palate for the sweetness of it. So this was a time where the Caribbean was pumping out as much wealth in the form of sugar and rum as possible, and all of it was leaving and going over to Britain. If you look at how the world changed, it became way more efficient to have centralized sugar factories. So now you had sugarcane fields, you would cut the cane and you would send it to the centralized factory to be processed. So this cut out all of the small little sugar factories around, which also closed down a lot of the distilleries because you didn't have the leftover molasses anymore. And so where, you know, Barbados used to have hundreds of distilleries, hundreds of sugar factories. Now they have 4. Jamaica had hundreds. Today they have 6. So the world completely changed. Also with the rise of sugar coming from sugar beets, where you didn't have to import it across the seas anymore. You could grow sugar beets at home. And this really, really changed the landscape of rum production in the Caribbean. So the point is that Hampton Estate is a distillery that has been producing rum since 1753, but it was never available on the island until very, very recently. So if you went to Jamaica and you asked for Hampton, people still in some areas don't know what it is. They've never heard of it before because none of the liquid ever stayed on the island. All of it was shipped off in bulk. Which is very kind of a different landscape than a lot of other spirits where you have the producer and then they have a brand, or what we're used to today. So it's a completely different model. But Hampton has been producing in the same way since the early 1900s, and this way that they production is so unique to this region and so special that it's the flavor, when you put it in your mouth and you taste it, is of a very traditional old style of Jamaica rum. And also the distillery is a very old traditional Jamaica distillery. So Hampton Estate it's absolutely incredible, complex, delicious rum, but it's also the legacy of traditional rum and traditional distillation practices. It's, as you can see, it's a very old distillery. It looks just like an 18th century distillery because it is. When the newer owners bought it, the Hussey family bought it in 2009, they didn't change anything. They replaced a couple of floorboards because maybe you would fall through. I almost fell through like 4 times. So they replaced a couple of the floorboards, but nothing else has changed. Like really, guys, this is just the most iconic old traditional distillery that probably still operates. There's a couple of things that make it incredibly unique that we love to discuss. The first one, here's a map. If you look at Jamaica sort of like a wine region, where you have different areas and they have different styles. If you look at the sort of, if you were to draw a horizontal line through Jamaica, traditionally the distilleries on the southern side of the island would be the bigger distilleries. The port was on the south side, so these distilleries were producing very, very high volumes, putting it on a boat and shipping it. So you have Clarendon, New Yarmouth, all of the distilleries that closed, but these were producing volume. If you look at the distilleries that go across the top, like Hampton and Trelawney, Long Pond and Trelawney, that still exists, these distilleries weren't producing volume, but they were producing very, very specific flavorful rums. So smaller volume, but higher in flavor. So you have kind of 2 different subregions. And then within the territory, if you talk about a rum from Trelawney, it's different than a rum from St. Catherine. It's different than a rum from Clarendon because of the traditions, because of the production practices, because of the regional geography, because of the limestone soil, because of everything. So Jamaica rum is a very diverse category, even with the 6 distilleries that still exist today. Maybe compared to the rest of the world of rum, they are funky, right? Jamaica rum is funky. Jamaica rum has these overripe kind of tropical fruit notes. And in the world of Jamaica rum, from 0 to super funk, Hampton is George Clinton. Hampton is P-Funk. Hampton makes the funkiest of the funky, as is the style of Trelawney. The distillery has been around since 1753. It's only had a couple of owners. So you can see that in the whole timeline, there hasn't been a whole lot of change. In the early 1900s, the kind of iconic high ester technology that makes Hampton Estate today was invented, and it has never been changed since. 2009, the Hussey family bought the distillery. They actually set out to buy Long Pond Sugar Factory. It was Christelle, who's kind of the face of the distillery for us. Her grandfather, it was his lifelong dream to own a sugar factory. So they bought Long Pond Sugar Factory, not related to Long Pond Distillery anymore. And with it came this seemingly kind of dilapidated little distillery that they really didn't know what to do with. Thankfully for us, they asked around and said, what is this? And everybody said, this is the heritage of rum, don't change anything. And they listened, which is really incredible. They could have knocked it down and built something far more efficient, but luckily they didn't. So from 1753 to 2018, this is the first time that we get to taste liquid that has been aged at the distillery. So these bottles are really like pretty groundbreaking for the world of spirit, and especially for the world of rum. If you went back to early 1900s, Trelawney was known for being the Grand Cru of rum. There's 23 distilleries crammed into this pretty small parish. It's a very, very rural area. It's very natural. There's lots of karst formations. It's sort of at the northern tip of Cockpit County. So it's a kind of like a rainforest just shoved into this little area, and it has all these endemic species, and it used to have all of these endemic distilleries because to produce Trelawney rum was so special and so iconic of this area that they became the most famous. Today there's 2 left, just Hampton and Long Pond. But absolutely beautiful. If you guys have a chance to go to Jamaica, absolutely go visit Hampton. It's an experience that you'll really, really never forget. I can still feel it on my skin. It's incredible. So there's a couple of things that really tie the distillery to the land that it comes from, to the terroir that it comes from. A lot of rum distilleries don't talk about spring water because it doesn't really matter. Most distilleries use like the purest demineralized water that they can get, but Hampton uses spring water from Trelawney. They have their own dam. It's been called the Hampton Dam for a very long time, about 2 kilometers from the distillery. So all of their water in all of their production practices comes from Trelawney. It's a limestone soil, so it's incredibly pure water. They do a test of spring water annually, and Jamaica continually has some of the top marks, but especially from this area because it's so filtered through the limestone. It's very, very pure water. A couple of years ago, there was a problem in the pipes coming from the dam down to the distillery, and so they tried to use the national water of Jamaica, and the rum didn't taste anything like Hampton. So like the very famous whiskey distilleries in Scotland that love to talk about how pure and beautiful their water is, here it matters too. So they use this in all of their production practices, from diluting their molasses to allow for fermentation, to proofing down everything. So there's something in the water, but it makes it iconically Hampton. The fermentation of Hampton is incredibly important. They're very, very famous for their wild fermentation. The raw material at Hampton is kind of an interesting situation where this sort of concept that rum is made from molasses or juice is a pretty recent concept in the world of rum. If you were to go back past 100 years ago, a lot of distilleries would have been making it from both, especially iconic of this area and tradition. And so they would be blending molasses with juice. So Hampton is a molasses-based rum, but it's only about 20% molasses. They also incorporate fresh sugarcane juice that they've allowed to spoil a little bit, sour a little bit into the blend. And then they use sort of a plethora of other interesting techniques that we'll talk about in a little bit to produce their wash. They take their wash and they put it in these really beautiful wooden vats. They are produced from local chestnut trees, and they last up to 100 years, some over. They have like the mother vat in the ceiling of the distillery looking out over all the little baby vats. But fermentation here is completely wild. It's not spontaneous because all of the yeast and all of the bacteria that ferment all are alive in this room. So when you walk into the fermentation rooms at Hampton, the whole room is alive. So they put their wash into these wooden tanks, and they allow it to sit for about a week for fermentation, and then about 15 days for bacterial fermentation after the alcoholic fermentation. So it's a very, very extended fermentation. If you consider that industrial rum is maybe 12, 18 hours, a very quick fermentation. A lot of rum is maybe 72 hours, 40, something like that. 72 hours is considered a pretty long fermentation. At Hampton, it's going on 2 weeks. So a very, very extended fermentation with all of the natural yeast of Trelawney. So again, tying it to this area, to this tradition. It allows it just to create lots and lots of complexity in the fermentation, which is then distilled out. Absolutely incredible.
Beautiful bubbles.
Right? They're so cute. This is one of their fermentation. This house is original. So everything here is original. You can kind of see the floorboards are a little sketchy. You have to be very, very careful when you walk in. But the fermentation is really what builds all of the character and identity of the liquid. And then they're very famous for this high ester production. So esters are a flavor profile, essentially, under the umbrella of congeners. So congeners are kind of a group of everything else in the liquid that is not alcohol and is not water, right? So if you have a bottle of 40% rum or 40% spirit, you know that's 40% alcohol and 60% water. But alcohol and water isn't going to have any aroma or any flavor. So it's the 0.00001% of the other stuff that is what gives it all of its flavor and texture and aromatics. These are congeners, so these are esters and aldehydes and long chain fatty acids and all the nerdy stuff. But esters are really what are responsible for these aromatics, for these sort of overripe fruit notes, these pineapple notes, these banana notes that are so iconic to Jamaica rum. And they have a couple of different ways of creating this. First is in their mix of raw material. So the molasses that's mixed with the fresh cane juice that's allowed to sour a little bit. It's also mixed with dunder. And dunder, in whiskey, it's called backset. So it's after distillation, all of the really heavy alcohols that are never going to go over, they're never going to vaporize, they're just too heavy, they require too much heat and energy. They're all collected in the bottom of your pot still. So when you finish distillation, there's some liquid, there's some material left in your pot still. In whiskey, this is sour mashing. In Jamaica rum, it's called dunder. And so they take this out of the pot still, but it's still super rich in yeast cells and acids and esters and all of these compounds that when they interact with the alcohol that's produced during fermentation, right? The yeast eats the sugar and out comes alcohol. When this interacts with these compounds in this dunder, it creates beautiful, big, funky, fruity esters. So this is kind of the iconic thing of this style of Jamaica rum, is using dunder in their fermentation, along with the
disco
molasses.
lights in the dunder.
Disco lights. Oh yeah. Maybe from the holes in the ceiling, in the tin ceiling.
Right, that makes sense.
Or it just sparkles. So they have created this really complex, beautiful wash with varying degrees. So they'll use different sort of recipes of the raw material and the fermentation times and areas to produce all of these different compounds of wash, and then they run it through their pot stills, which are absolutely beautiful. They have 4 now, they're putting in a 5th, so they're growing a little bit, but pot still distillation is really the best way to exalt all of the flavor that you created in fermentation. Fermentation is the creation of flavor. You can't distill out something that wasn't there to begin with. Distillation is magic, but you can't make something appear that wasn't there to begin with. So in pot still distillation, it's really the best way to exalt all of this super intense flavor and aromatics that you just spent 2 weeks long creating in fermentation. So Hampton is still a distillery that exclusively uses pot still, which is quite rare in the world, because they still use these very old methods to produce these marks or different recipe, different flavor profiles for blenders. So if you were a blender, you would know exactly which recipe from a distillery like Hampton Estate that you needed to create your Royal Navy blend or your blend over in Europe. So Hampton knows a recipe of fermentation and distillation to create a very specific flavor profile that blenders and brokers would then order. So everything that Hampton created in the past was all essentially pre-ordered. So the blender would say, okay, I need, 6 barrels of LROK, which denoted a specific flavor profile, 6 of this, 6 of that. They would produce it, they would send it over to Europe for the blenders. So the liquid was constantly moving out of the distillery in different flavor profiles. So they became incredibly sought after for their liquid because of their techniques and of production. They're able to create such powerful, such incredibly intense aromatically charged rum that the blenders started seeking it out. If you were creating a blend of rum and you wanted to have some less expensive, more approachable spirit, and then you put a little bit of like incredibly high ester Jamaica rum into it, it's going to round out your blend and it's going to add a lot of complexity that's going to taste pretty good. And so the blenders started seeking out these incredibly high ester marks of Hampton Estate and Trelawney distilleries to blend it into their rum. They were called continental flavoring, not that the rum was flavored, but they were using this rum to flavor other rum. So they became very, very famous in the blenders and brokerage world, and Hampton still produces all of them today. So they still produce all of these historic marks as a different mechanism of fermentation and distillation to produce these recipes that still exist today. Historically, they would have been sent over to the blenders, but the world is changing a little bit. So they have these beautiful pot stills, the John Doerr from 1960, the Vendome, which looks out over the cane fields from 1994, the TNT, which is a South African still, which is where I am right now, from 2016, and then this is their kind of iconic Forsyth's pot still from 2010.
What are the size differences on those, Kate?
Size differences?
Yeah.
18,000.
They range, right?
Yeah, the Forsyth's is 18,900 liter, 18,900. These are a little, or the John Doerr is a little bit smaller, 75, 60. So The Vendome, TNT, and Forsyths are about 19.
And so these different marks that they create are blends from each different still sometimes, or maybe one's only off of one still?
It'd be a different makeup of the fermentation. So different levels of the different wash, different amounts of dunder added to it to create a different fermentation. And then they can adjust the fermentation to create a lighter, maybe they're using a lighter, quicker fermentation with no dunder to create some of their lighter marks, and then a really, really long, heavy acidic fermentation to create some of their very, very heavy marks. So they can.
So depending on the fermentation style, will depend on which still they use.
And then all the stills are going to act a little bit differently. So
Right.
They know exactly what they need to create a very specific flavor profile, repeatedly so, for 300 years.
And how many of those profiles, or is that what this is?
That's what this is. So at the very least, they produce OWH, which is their lightest mark. It says 40 to 80, but it's pretty hard for them to go below 80. If you consider that, I don't know, vodka is like maybe 10 or 11, 80 is still pretty flavorful for a spirit. And they go all the way up to 1600. 1600 is also the legal limit for Jamaica rum. Because if you have an incredible concentration of flavor, then you need less of it, right, to make into your blends. Hampton could go all the way up to, I don't know, 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 grams of esters per hectoliter of pure alcohol, which is what these measurements are, grams per hectoliter of pure alcohol. They could go all the way up to 4,000, 5,000, 6,000 if they were legally able to, but the government in Jamaica has capped it at 1,600, so basically for taxes, so that they can still get paid. So they're able to produce all of these different marks, which are all of these different flavor profiles. And you see these showing up in the Habitatia and Velier range. So last year we had the LFCH, which would have been Christel's grandfather. It's the latest mark of the distillery that he created, Lawrence Francis Close Hussey. This year we have coming in the L Rock in both aged and unaged, so between 300 and 400, which for Hampton is still a little bit on the lighter side, but for most rum, that's pretty funky. But they can go all the way up to 1,600, which is DOK. So these are all historic marks of the distillery that are specific recipes for the blenders, because all of this liquid was always shipped off island and blended outside, blended over in Europe, mostly. So it's really, really incredible that for the very first time in the history of the distillery, when Christel's family, the Husseys, bought the distillery in 2009, they kept all of their relationships with the brokers and blenders and all of their people who are buying bulk rum from them. So they still produce a lot of bulk rum to fill the orders that they inherited when they bought the distillery. But then they said, well, why don't, our rum obviously has value. There's interest in it. People are buying it, and people have been buying it for a very long time. Why don't we have a brand of rum that we create ourselves? And so they created the very first brand of Hampton Estate rum, which is called Rum Fire. If you guys have ever tried Rum Fire, it's like super rock and roll, unaged, very like rough and rugged, super delicious Hampton Estate. It has this very iconic, like sort of 90s inkjet blue and red flames on the label, super cult classic now. But Rum Fire was the first ever brand of Hampton Estate in the history of Hampton Estate that they released in 2009. The next year in 2010, they put down the very first casks of Hampton Estate rum at Hampton Estate. So if you consider in an almost 300-year history that the first casks casks of rum that were aged at the distillery are now 10 years old. But it's 10 years in Jamaica. You have to understand that the aging of Jamaica versus the aging of rum in Scotland or Liverpool or cognac is quite different. The angel share, the evaporation rate is different. Jamaica is very hot. The interaction between the wood and the liquid is very different than it is in Europe, where in parts of Jamaica, it's usually 6 to 10% evaporation per year. In Scotland, it tends to be like 1 or 2%. So you get a much more accelerated maturation. It's not a direct link. People like to say, you know, it's 3 times faster. So a 7-year-old rum aged in Jamaica would be like a 21-year-old spirit aged in Europe. And that's kind of useful to understand a little bit, but it's a very different aging. I like to think of it kind of like a slow cooker versus a hot grill, right? If you're putting something in a slow cooker for 3 days and that flavor is concentrating, it just takes a lot longer versus throwing jerk chicken on a hot flame. Both are delicious. They're just very different. In terms of Hampton though, they've been selling bulk rum for so long that it's really been these independent bottlers in Europe that you could only buy Hampton Estate from because it was always blended. So you didn't really have access to the distillery because they weren't releasing their own bottles. They weren't aging it themselves till very recently. And so now for the very first time, we're able to taste Hampton Estate that has been aged at Hampton Estate for the first time in the history of the distillery, which is just an incredible story tradition of this distillery, of this sort of legacy of very old style of rum bottled for the first time. And then of course, this is pure single rum. So this is no additives, there's no sugar, there's no coloring, nothing is added. And this is also Jamaica law. So Jamaica law says that to be called a Jamaican rum, you have to be aged in Jamaica. So you can't sell rum from Jamaica that has been aged outside of Jamaica in Jamaica. It becomes unrecognizable. If you take a rum out of Jamaica, you age it somewhere else, it's no longer Jamaican rum to the Jamaican people. So this is Jamaica Rum by GI. And in Jamaica, they don't have a history of adding sugar or flavoring or anything to their rum. So all of the flavor that you're getting in the bottle is just coming from the fermentation, the spring water, the distillation, the raw material, the iconic endemic nature of Trelawney and of Hampton Estate. So
someone asked about if you could touch on Hogo.
Yeah, Hogo comes from the French haut gout, which I'm not sure if I'm saying this right, or high flavor. It's a word that's used to describe the aromas of aged or aging kind of spoiling meat, that very like savory kind of intense, like it's almost a little bit gross and weird, but you kind of still like it. And it's applied to Jamaica rum to describe the funk. Funkiness is kind of a strange word that we use to describe this style of rum. And Jamaica rum is very well known for its funky character. And unless you taste funk, it's really hard to sort of understand what that means. But the French call it Hogo or Hoke out as high flavor. It's that sort of overripe, almost rotting meat, or super savory to the point of, this is almost a little bit dangerous, but I really like it and I can't stop drinking it. But it's that, it refers to that overripe pineapple and banana. I like to think of Jamaica rum as like, I like to bake, and I made a lot of banana bread when I was younger. And when bananas are like perfectly yellow or a little bit green, it makes terrible banana bread. Like you need them to be kind of like turning black and a little bit mushy, because it's that like caramelized, savory, overripe banana that makes the best banana bread. And that like sort of black slimy banana thing is totally rum.
Sorry, you were breaking up a lot.
I think our quick connection from South Africa is a little.
Yeah.
You're frozen, Kate.
Sorry to do it, Kate, but
Let me plug in my camera. Jan, say something. Is that better?
okay. It looks like yeah. It looks
There
like
we
it's
go.
back. There we go. Okay.
Your internet connection is unstable. I think my computer was just running out of a little bit of battery.
Remix.
Everybody's unstable right now. Come on.
Everybody's on. Is Jan still on here?
Nah, he had to go feed the baby, quote unquote,
The baby,
which he
yeah.
said was not code for anything.
It's a real life baby.
You know, covering all his bases.
Yeah, right. Do you guys have some? Are you drinking it? Megan, what do you think of it? You got some right there. I wish I had some. I have no good rum here.
Uh-oh.
Oh, it's delicious. Funky wow.
So we're definitely over an hour. So anyone that needs or feels they have to bounce, like, it's totally understandable. Leave when you need to. If there's any more questions about Hampton, we can get into those now, or we can jump into some Clarin. But it seems like there isn't at the moment.
Cool.
So
We can jump into
I was
some.
addressing, yeah.
Cool. So we talked a little bit before about how if you go back to the history of rum, there would have been hundreds of distilleries in Barbados, and today there's 4. Hundreds in Jamaica, there's 6, there's 7 in Martinique, there's 1, soon to be 2 in Grenada. Trinidad would have had lots and lots. Today there's just Angostura. And this is sort of what happened all over the Caribbean, which is completely true except for Haiti. Haiti is a little bit of a different story because they're the only country or the only island in the Caribbean that rebelled against the French colonialists and won. So in 1804, the Haitians had a revolution. The slaves rebelled and they won their independence, which is incredible. The slaves rebelled against the French and they won. This is the only place where this happened. There was lots of other rebellions happening around. And so when the French said, okay, you win, they couldn't really acknowledge them as an independent nation because this would have encouraged all of the other rebellions that were happening in the Caribbean around. They didn't want to trade with them. They didn't want to respect them. So Haiti kind of got swept under a rug a bit in terms of socio-political economics today. They're in a really kind of interesting place. But what that means in terms of rum is that they've also essentially skipped several generations of pesticides and chemicals and fertilizers and hybrid sugarcane and industrialization. We say that Haiti is so in the past that now it's the future of things that we love and that we want. Everything in Haiti is organic, not to be organic, but because pesticides and fertilizers, these things never arrived there, so they don't use them. And they don't want to. I love that after the earthquake happened, Monsanto said, we will donate, like 6 million seeds or something to the island, and they burned them all because they don't want GMO seeds. And when you go to Haiti and you eat the grapefruit and the pineapple and the chicken, it still tastes so incredible and so far from what we have here. Our limes are just sour, right? The citron vert, these tiny little limes in Haiti, have so much aromatics and flavor. Our sugar is just sweet. The Rapidu sugar in Haiti has all this like mineral and richness and depth to it. It's absolutely delicious. So things in Haiti are so still done in the old way that they've sort of skipped into the future of, you know, the things that we love. Like I think that Clarin would not be nearly as successful as we found if it wasn't for mezcal. People learn to drink authentic local spirit, unaged at a high proof out of a glass neat. But if you go to the sort of common denominator of these local spirits, like mezcal, like Clarin, like Ragu and Cape Verde, like cachaça in the forests of Brazil, you find that there's a lot of sort of similarities because this is the only way that you could have produced things, right? You have your raw material that grows locally, you harvest it and coax out the sugar, you distill it on a little pot still, and then you drink it off of the still. So in Haiti, there's still 500 plus, who knows how many really, small shacks called guildives that produce local spirit for local consumption called Clarin. So Clarin is the name of the spirit. In Haiti, they say Clarin. In France, they say Clarin. We say Clarin. It's clear, it's clair, it's Clarin. So it's the local spirit for local consumption. And if you want to drink Clarin in Haiti, you take a plastic water bottle, you go to the center of the town or to the distillery, and you fill it up and you drink Clarin. And that's really been the history of the spirit for 300 plus years. If you're in a small village, maybe there's just one distillery. If you're in a big village, maybe there's 10, 15, 20. You have more people, so you have more thirsts, so you have more distilleries, and it's just completely integrated into Haitian life. If you're celebrating, if you're mourning, in religious ceremonies, Clarin is absolutely present. I love that Haiti sort of drips literally in Clarin and figuratively in art. You can't escape the Clarin and you can't escape the art in Haiti. It's absolutely beautiful. People will tell you that
mezcal of Haiti, man.
or maybe
the same
mezcal is the mezcal is the.
I mean, Kate, I've told this so many times. We had like five or six cars, 11 flat tires, something like that, over 6 days. And then literally every flat tire, no matter where we were in some rural, very, very far away place, someone comes out. Luca asks them if they have Clarin. Of course they have Clarin. Everyone's got Clarin. No one's drunk on Clarin really, but they've all got it. And then we fix the tire, we drink Clarin, and we get back on the road. But yeah, it's a part of their life, and it's just a part of everyone's life there.
Absolutely.
Fascinating.
Gino knows that Haiti is not super scary or dangerous. A lot of people will tell you, oh, Haiti's very poor and it's dangerous. And they talk about super negative things, earthquakes and trauma, which are all real, but Haiti's also incredibly beautiful. This is Ilavache on the south coast, where Gino and I got to spend a couple really lovely days on this beach, hanging out, drinking Clarin. This is a marketplace with all of the really beautiful produce and food, and it's super busy and active. Art, bananas. Haiti is just one of the most absolutely beautiful places that I've ever had the privilege of visiting. I feel very lucky. I love to think that this guy's cooler is full of Clarin. It very well could be. But I just love showing pictures of how beautiful it is because it's a really, really special place. This is a Clarin distillery, so it looks a little bit different than distilleries that y'all have probably seen in the past. This is a pretty small one, but these are quite common around. And if you are driving in a car or walking and you smell some sugarcane boiling, you smell some sweetness in the air, you can probably sort of go through the field, and there will be a small distillery like this producing Clarin, a few guys hanging out producing, and that's really 500 of these. But they're very, very small compared to modern day distilleries. This is one of the few places in the world that you could ever take a picture like this. In the rest of the Caribbean, sugarcane is typically grown in monoculture. So you'll have sugarcane fields here, maybe bananas planted here, maybe mangoes planted here. In Haiti, it's all mixed up. It's in polyculture, or the sugarcane is wild. So it's really just incredibly beautiful to see everything all mixed up like this, but it also means that the soil is super, super rich because you have lots of different vegetation. They cut the sugar cane by hand. If you're going to use an industrial cane cutter, a mechanized one, you can only do so on flat land. You can't use cane cutter trucks on mountains. Haiti is very, very mountainous, so it's very difficult to use that also. This is the way that they've always done it, and the cane cutters are super highly skilled. They know the cane that is mature and should be cut. They know the younger stuff that they can leave for the next harvest. Sugar has a gravity to it, so they know the sweet spot on the sugar cane that they can cut. Also, if you're using mechanical cutters, you pull up everything as you go, and then you have to replant every year. When you plant sugarcane, typically the first year it takes about 18 months to ripen, and then you'll get, depending on the location and the soil and the quality of the cane, you can get 6, 7, 8 different harvests after. So it's a grass, right? So it'll keep growing. So if you leave a bit of the rootstock, the cane will grow again. So you don't have to replant it every year if you do it in this way, where you're hand cutting it and you're leaving a bit of the rootstock for the next year. So for them, it's super good. There's lots and lots of different types of cane in Haiti. They're all pretty regional. So the varieties of cane that grow up in the mountains versus the coast, north to south, east to west, are all quite different. And there's many of them that are old varietals of cane, so pre-hybrid. What the rest of the Caribbean and the world uses for sugarcane is typically hybrid sugarcane that's designed for sugar production or for rum production. So it grows, big like this, and they juice it, and you get quite a bit of juice coming out of it. But a lot of the varieties in Haiti are still very old varieties that are kind of spindly little grasses like this. You juice it and not a lot comes out, but the drops that do come out are super aromatic, lots and lots of flavor. And if you taste them around, if you taste the juice, it absolutely tastes different. This one's called Bouche. You see the kids on the side of the road eating it. It's a very sweet, kind of juicy sugar cane. This is crystalline, which is what we talked about a little bit before with Providence. So this is just an incredibly beautiful, very, very old variety of sugarcane. Sugarcane isn't indigenous to the Caribbean. It was brought there literally by Christopher Columbus in 1493. His wife's family had sugarcane plantations in the Canary Islands. They brought some over on the ship. They planted it in Hispaniola, and the world was forever changed. So they have very, very old varieties of sugarcane in this region. There's lots and lots of different kinds. You can see that there's several different kinds. Some of them are kind of curvy. Some of them are straight. Some of them have long segments, short segments. This one in the middle here, the yellow one, is Madame Ms. There's some crystalline. It's all kind of mixed up. So they cut the sugar cane by hand, and then they kind of put it into piles in the field, and a lot of times they'll use donkeys or bulls, and they'll take the sugar cane from the field to the distillery, which is kind of also a notion that it's very, very close. You can't grow sugarcane 30 miles away, cut it, and bring it to your distillery, because yeast wants to eat sugar, right? And there's yeast everywhere. And so the sugarcane will start to ferment on its voyage to the distillery. So they cut the sugarcane, they load it onto racks like this, or onto the backs of donkeys like this, and they bring it directly to the distillery. They'll put it into a pile, and there's guys there who are crushing it right away. So it's literally cut, thrown into a pile, brought to the distillery, and crushed within a very, very short time, or else it will start fermenting. If you visit a rum distillery and you see the cane starts to turn like pink or brown or black on the ends, this is bacterial fermentation already happening, and this will create off flavors in your Clarin. It won't taste very good. So they don't want that to happen. So they process it quite immediately.
Hey, I have a quick question about the cane. So I know year by year you can use it. You said for up to, like, what did you say, 8 to 10 years?
6 to 8 years, yeah, it kind of depends.
I've heard also that you can use them for up to 25 if the soil is good. So that's very different. But I was also wondering, like, do sugar levels change as the cane plant gets older, and what, like, how does that vary? I know obviously like rain and terroir makes a big difference, but
yeah, it depends on the variety, it depends on the soil, it depends on the strength, but essentially, like, every year it's going to get weaker and weaker in terms of bricks and in terms of strength of the sugar cane, till it gets to a point where it's just not really economically viable or production viable to get enough sugar out of it. I've heard it's typically, I've never heard 25 years before. I would love to know what that is, because that sounds like some really good stock of cane. It also
the producer in Martinique.
Yeah, it might depend also if it's a hybrid varietal. They might last a little bit longer because they're designed for that. But I have never heard that long, but it's totally possible. But yeah, the stock will just get weaker and weaker, thinner and thinner, smaller and smaller, and the bricks will go down till it's better to take it out and replant it and then start the process all over.
Yeah, I was going to ask if there was a certain point where it just makes more sense to just plant a new one rather than using an old one if you're having to, like, continue farming it and watering it and all that. It seems like it would just make sense.
Absolutely. Exactly. So when they get it back to the distillery, they crush it. A lot of the bigger distilleries, they're still very small, and the ones that we use, I'll use these mechanical crushers like this. So they're little diesel mills that they hand feed the sugar cane into, and it spits out delicious juice. It's still pretty normal to see mills like this as well, specifically up in the north in Saint-Michel de Hautelaye, where Michel Sajus's distillery is. You find these pretty common in villages where there's no electricity. You can't have an electric mill, and so they'll still use these old wooden mills, which, you have two cows like this that turn the wooden stick, and it goes around and it turns these rollers like this, so they feed the sugar cane between the rollers. But look at these gaps, there's quite big gaps in it, so you put the sugar cane in, it just kind of does this. But if you can crush the cane, then you can make Clarin, and you can drink Clarin, and that's kind of the whole point. I've seen one of these in the Museum of St. James in Martinique, and if you look at, like, very, very early, like the history of rum books, you'll see sugarcane used to be crushed on wooden mills in the history, but in Haiti, they're still quite common today.
Somebody asked, are they burning cane to remove pests or anything before harvesting? And I didn't see that, but have you?
No, they don't burn their cane.
They're also just growing, like the cane is growing next to all sorts of other things. So if you burn the cane uncontrollably, you could burn your fruit, you could burn other things that are being used, right?
Yeah. Yeah, they don't burn the cane there.
They just kind of go in with a machete and just start cutting.
They're so fast too.
Yeah.
They cut it and it's a perfect baton, stack it next. They're very, very fast. But you can see here them hand feeding those cane into these rollers like that. And then they have juice with red marks all over it. Is that you, Gino? Are you trying pencils?
Sorry, we have another Zoom bomber. What in the world?
This poor girl.
I don't know who this is.
So then you have beautiful sugarcane juice, and you ferment it. So Hampton is a wild fermentation because they're taking their raw material, they're putting it into their room, which kind of acts like a sourdough mother. So the fermentation is wild, it's natural with all the natural yeast. Here it's a spontaneous fermentation. So they take the juice and they essentially put it outside and they let Mother Nature do its thing. It's completely wild and natural. If you go there and you ask, excuse me, how long is your fermentation? A lot of times they'll tell you, I don't know, when it's done, it's done. Because if the season is a little bit more hot or the climate gets a little bit chillier, it's going to absolutely change the length of the fermentation because it's just outside in the elements. Fermentation is also kind of the bottleneck of production. So you see a lot of fermentation vessels like this, where they're 55-gallon drums. They're fermenting less liquid, but they have fermentations at every stage. So they'll have juice to distill every day. If you have bigger distillery or bigger fermentation vats like this, this is at Casimir. It's a big mango tree wood fermentation vat. And if you have one of these and it takes around 5-8 days to ferment, then you can distill once every 5 or 8 days. Great. Hey, figured that out. So the way
I think I removed the person that was doing it.
Great. So one of the ways that they can sort of increase their production without changing their tradition is by adding more fermentation vats. So if you have 2 of these big vats, you can distill quite a bit of liquid twice a week. If you have 14 of them, you could distill twice a day. So the smaller distilleries, you kind of see more this kind of vibe here, like this. This is at Michel Sagis's distillery, where he's adding more big fermentation vats so that he can increase his production. But it's still an all wild, all natural, so nothing's changing. He just has more liquid to use as his company grows, which is super, super cool. They make it all on site. So they chop down the trees and they produce all of the wood and they coop everything on site like this. Bubbles. So then they distill the fermented juice and they do so in these really cool pot stills that are basically 1750s French technology. So it's essentially an old cognac still where you have the chauffe à vent, or this preheater for the wash. So they put their wash in, it heats up with the distillation that's happening at that time, and then it's already preheated, so then it's ready to go into the still above room temp. So the pot still is sort of in this concrete block like that, and then they have a short column behind. So it's a hybrid still or a batch still. It gets super, super intensity from the pot still, so it's exalting all of that flavor in a week-long natural fermentation. And then the column still cleans it up a little bit, and it bumps it up to a higher proof. So they don't have to distill it 2-3 times in the pot still to get up to drinking proof. They can distill it one time and then they drink it at still proof off of the still. I think that this is the only spirit, or one of the few spirits, maybe the only rum in the world that has no water added to it. So there's no water added to it in to the juice in fermentation, and then there's no water added after distillation. So what's in the bottle is completely off of the still. It's not filtered, fined, diluted, anything.
Just like in mezcal, do they proof it with heads and tails like in mezcal?
No, they make their cuts, so they're not proofed at all. They make cuts and drink it.
Okay.
Yeah, so it really changes every day. The
Yeah.
Clarin that you drink off of a still today is going to be different than what comes off of the still tomorrow, because it's a total natural thing. You know, I'm a natural thing too, and I hope that tomorrow I'm different than today, because we're learning and growing and becoming different. So Clarin acts in the same way. I'll tell you about the bottlings and how that works in a little bit. But these stills you find all over Haiti. More or less everybody has the same still. It's all heated by direct fire, so they're burning big gas or wood. Wood in this situation is a little bit better because it's a very even burn. Big gas, if you're throwing it into a wood burning oven like this, it's kind of like throwing newspaper into a fireplace. It's a very hot burn, and it can kind of scald the pot still a little bit. So a lot of them use wood for a really slow, even temperature burn. This is the Casimir, so you can see that chauffeur on here, the preheater, the pot stills down below, and the short little column. This is a discontinuous distillation, so it has a little column, maybe 3-5 plates, something like that. But it's not a column still distillation where it's a continuous distillation. It's a one batch session. So they start their distillation, they make their cuts, they finish it, and then they start the process all over. So it's batch distillation. It does have a short column, but it's not a column still distillation. And then they have the liquid.
But it's so cool to see this still that is obviously pieced together from whatever is kind of around, and it says a lot about like the tumultuous past of Haiti and like how I don't know a diplomatic way to say it, but how poor it is, but they're still just like producing this amazing juice with whatever they have. I think it's really, really cool and really special.
Yeah. It's super cool to see that the setups in the distillery are more or less similar across the country, but the liquid is so different. I don't know if any of you have some Clarin in front of you, but if you have the opportunity to taste the producers that we work with side by side, they're just incredibly different and diverse from each other, because everything about it is different. So the liquid that comes off of this still is different than the liquid that comes off of this still, because the sugar cane is different, the natural yeast in the air is different, the terroir of the land, if you're on the coast, in the mountains, inland by the sea, the terroir is very different, but it's also the terroir of the mind, because these guys are all 4th, 5th, 6th generation distillers, so they produce in the way their fathers and grandfathers did before them. There's not a lot of sharing of information between villages. The villages are quite insular, so technique isn't really shared, so you just make Clarin as they did before, in the style and in the terroir of your village, but also in the style and terroir of your mental terroir, right? Because it's a local passed down spirit. And in Haiti, this is a grocery item. You know, you grab your chicken, you grab your pineapple, you grab your citron vert, you grab your Clarin, you go home. So for us, at least for me, this is like so special. You know, it came so far. If you guys could see the journey that this liquid makes to get to our bar tops and our countertops and into our glasses. I mean, like Gino said, 11 flat tires later, we got to visit all of these places, and it's so rural, and it's so far, and it's so really wild that you know, the fact that it can even be in a bottle and we get to share it is so absolutely incredible. But yeah, all the liquid is just absolutely completely different coming off of the still. And when you taste them side by side, you really understand. And also if you taste them year to year, what we had in the market first was 2016, 2017, 2018 is what we're on now. So if you guys have the opportunity to find some bottles and taste them next to each other, you see that they have threads of familiarity. Sajus tastes like Sajus, but there's absolutely differences. Differences definitely in terms of the ABV and a little bit of just kind of changes. And I really love the inconsistency about that because you really get to taste the history of Haiti. You get to taste what was happening in that year, particularly the first year that we released, 2016. It was the year of Hurricane Matthew, which whirled through Haiti. And so the natural yeast in the air got all churned up. So the natural yeast got churned up. The sugarcane had a very different harvest than it had before. It got very, very wet. And so specifically Laval, I find is completely different than 2017 or 18. And I love that. You're tasting what happened in Haiti those years. One
other question or one other thing that I would like to hear more about is that if I recall correctly, Laval and Casimir throw a little bit of herbs and like citrus and kind of whatever is around right into their fermentation, right?
Yeah, I'll show you pictures of that in about 3 minutes.
Oh, sorry. I'm jumping the gun. Sorry.
Jumping the gun. This is Michel Sajus. So this is the Clarin coming off of his still goes into these big jugs like this. He has to lock it up at night so no one comes and steals his Clarin. I love his barrel thief made from a bucket and a stick. It's perfect. It works very, very well. That's my colleague Daniele with a water bottle filled with Clarin, I'm sure. And then you drink Clarin. So if you want to drink Clarin, typically you'll go to a table like this near the center of the village. You have to be a little bit careful because sometimes the gasoline and the Clarin are both in gallon jugs on the same table, so don't drink the wrong one. But you drink it like this out of jugs on the roadside in your home, completely integrated into Haitian life. So we work with 4 different producers from 4 different villages. The first is the Clarin of Michel Sajus. Sajus is located up in the village of Saint-Michel de Atalaï. Saint-Michel is on this super beautiful enclave. It's like an ocean of sugarcane. There's sugarcane everywhere as far as you can see. And there's so many distilleries up here, absolutely everywhere. This is Sajus's distillery. So you can see the pile of sugarcane where the donkeys in this case are bringing it to this pile. They dump it off there. And then you can see the guys inside the distillery crushing it. The stills are in that second room towards the back. This is Michel with his concrystalline and his still. So powered by wood here. I love Michel. He's so nice. He's super good English. He's really fun to talk to. And when you taste Sajus, I mean, if you gnaw on the sugar cane on concrystalline, it tastes exactly like what's in the bottle. It's very green and grassy, very botanical, herbaceous, very, very lifted and bright. It's my favorite of the Clarin for making like, daiquiris or really clean, elegant cocktails. It just really, really shows. His tend to be a little bit higher in ABV than the other ones. He makes his cuts a little bit closer. So his always tends to be a little bit more in that like 54, 56, 60 vibe, where the other ones tend to be a little bit lower. Fritz Laval's distillery. So Clarin being the name of the spirit, this is the Clarin of Michel Sajus, the Clarin of Fritz Laval. Fritz's distillery is down in a village called Cavaillon. Cavaillon is a pretty small village. It's basically like 2 streets that cross with a little market right off of the sea. So it's just about 1 kilometer off of the ocean. And when you taste the Clarin of Fritz Laval, it tastes very, very coastal. I grew up on the coast of Maine, and for me, it absolutely tastes like home. It's this like kind of briny, slaty rock, salt sea air thing that's super iconic of his distillery. This is his distillery. The type of cane that grows here is called Madame Meuse. It's this kind of yellowy, it's a little bit thicker than crystalline sugar cane. This is Fritz. With Fritz's still. His still looks completely different than the other stills in Haiti. And when Luca arrived there, he said, Fritz, why does your still look like this? And Fritz said, I don't know what you mean. And he said, well, everyone else's still is more or less the same, right? It's this like concrete block with the pot still in it in a short little column, and yours looks totally different. Where did you buy it? And he said, I didn't buy it, I made it. I like to think of Fritz Laval like the MacGyver of rum. So he made this still that for me kind of looks like R2-D2. And all of the other stills are powered by this direct fire underneath his still. Fritz's is again a little bit different, where he took the steam engine of a locomotive of a train, and he parked the train next to his still, and he took the wheels off and encased it in concrete. So I think that this is the only train-powered still that might exist in the world. So he takes the bagasse, or the hard fibers, after you press the sugar cane. It's super good for steam because it burns very, very hot like this. So he takes the bagasse, he feeds his steam engine, it creates steam, and it pipes over to his still and feeds his still with by steam and not direct fire. So it's a little bit of a different setup than we see around elsewhere.
Pretty remarkable.
Absolutely crazy.
Jason's asking, how do the distillers determine the bottling proof? Is there a target yield, organoleptic properties, flavor? Is it all of those things? I feel like it's mostly just flavor of what they're looking for. No,
I would say it's really none of those things. They don't determine the bottling proof. They take it off of the still, they put it into a plastic drum, they bring it to the town, and then you fill up your jug off of the still. So every year every day the proof is a little bit different. It's typically between 45 and 60%, but it's going to change a little bit every day, be a little bit different. I think that as us coming from the Western world, we tend to think about things as conscious decisions. You know, we have a brand, and our brand is in this shaped bottle with this shaped label, dipped in wax to look like this, and it's going to be, you know, a set blend of different profiles to achieve this, and we're going to bring it down to 40% or 46% or whatever, and it's going to be consistent every bottle, so that if you go to buy it off of the shelf, the bottles are the same color. And this is just a very different approach to spirits than local spirits, where it's just consumed locally. It's just not in the
I mean, I think what you're touching on is the difference between something that's capitalistically marketed versus just made for local, you know.
For local consumption, yeah. So it's not really
it hasn't seen the effects of like almost everything else we drink. Even mezcal is faced so many issues.
Yeah. I mean, this is truly a wild spirit where it's not a matter of decisions, it's a matter of circumstance. Sometimes it's hotter and your fermentation is longer, sometimes it's colder, sometimes, you know, it's a really natural environment dependent spirit, and so it's going to change, and so you drink it and it tastes good, and that's sort of been how it's been consumed. So it's just sort of a different approach to the spirit, where they're not making decisions to sell it on a shelf with a label. They're just trying to feed their village with beautiful Clarin. So to touch a little bit on what Megan mentioned before, Casimir is a little bit of a different style of Clarin. Casimir is Faubert Casimir. He's in the village of Baradere, which looks pretty close to where Laval is, but there's no road to get there, so you have to basically climb up and down a mountain in your Jeep, like one rock at a time. The village of Baradere is quite big. It's very isolated and difficult to get to, so it has a little bit of a bigger population. It's a fishing village in the mountains off the coast. This is Faubert Casimir on the left there with his baby. And this is the Distillery of Casimir. It's completely idyllic. It's really, really isolated and wild and absolutely beautiful. This is his distillery. The types of sugarcane that grow here, it's written like Hawaii. They say Avai. So they have Avai Blanc and Avai Rouge. So two different types of a similar. There's evidence that this is directly related to the Otaheite sugarcane, which is original to Polynesia. So you can see it in the picture on the left there. The Rouge is the shorter, kind of darker cane, and the Avai Blanc is the longer, straighter cane that Kazi's holding. His still is more or less like all of the other ones, where it's like this with the pot still burning, the chauffe à vent. His fermentation is a little bit different. The style of this village is to add citrus juice to the distill, or lemongrass, herbs. In Haiti, it's very, very hot and you can't control the temperature of the wash. But to get an extended, really long fermentation to develop lots and lots of flavor, where you can't control the temperature, you can control the pH. So instead of using chemical acidifiers like modern distilleries, Faubert will pick sour oranges or citron vert, little limes off of the local trees. He'll squeeze it into the wash, and this will change the pH so that he can have a really, really long extended fermentation. And when you taste it, it's super, super complex. I like to think of Sajus like mountain rum. It's super like botanical and fresh and bright. Laval is like very reminding of the ocean. It's very like coastal, kind of salty, kind of briny, like wet rock slaty. Casimir is just this like jungle funk. It's this like kind of soily, mushroomy, really, really savory, kind of overripe tropical note, but different than Jamaica in that it's more like overripe, like passion fruit, really like bright, fruity. It's really, really intense and beautiful. I'm really looking forward to it coming back. But in this area of his village, he adds these things to the wash to control the pH. I'm not sure about the lemongrass in there. I heard maybe it's because the chlorophyll will also help to control the pH and acidify it, or maybe that's just what he does. But this isn't to flavor the spirit, but it is to help control the wash so that he can have a really extended fermentation. And his fermentation is very extended. You can see the sort of crust that forms, and it's very, very thick. So he can ferment more like 7-8 days. It's a little bit longer, distilled like this. And then the last producer that we work with is La Roche, which is kind of a different story altogether. La Roche is the name of the distillery. It's owned by Romulus Bethel. It's in the village of Pignon. And I said before that you can't cut sugar cane from far away and truck it over because it'll already start fermenting. And so in the region of Pignon, there's no sugar cane that's growing quite nearby. So he buys syrup from the village of Sajus. The syrup is boiled down sugarcane juice, which kind of means other things in other areas. The US is the only country where you can make rum from rehiding sugarcane crystals. A lot of people refer to this as syrup, a little bit different than what they're doing in Haiti, where they're boiling down the sugarcane juice. I can get pictures. They do it in a battery like this, where they have a heat source on one side of these metal canisters, and they spoon it by hand closer and closer to the heat source, and it gets reduced until it's in a syrup. They can keep reducing it all the way down till it becomes like a paste, like a Parmesan in consistency. And they'll take that paste and they'll fill up these palm leaf tubes that you can kind of see in the top left of this picture. They let it dry and then they'll slice it and bring it to the marketplace. And this is Rapidu sugar. So their sugar is just boiled down sugarcane juice until it becomes crystals. But if you stop midway, you get really beautiful syrup. There's also this kind of notion like, you know,
I just wanted to point out the reason for that syrup is because it becomes shelf stable, basically.
Totally.
Right? Once you boil it
Totally,
down.
yeah. Yeah, we sort of have this notion that like, you know, this is what this is produced from and it always has to be that. In Haiti, they're making it for local consumption. And so if you are in the dry season, you can cut sugar cane, you can juice it, ferment it, distill it, drink it, and everybody's happy. If you're in the wet season, the Brix level of the cane will dilute because the cane will swell with all of the extra moisture in the air. So in the wet season, it's rather impossible to make Clarin from cut cane. So they'll boil it down, and it's exactly like that, Matt. It's kind of like canning it for later. So you can take that syrup, you can rehydrate it back to the appropriate Brix level for the natural yeast to do their thing. And then away you go with fermentation, distillation, and drinking Clarin. So a lot of distilleries will do both. They'll do fresh juice in the dry season and syrup in the wet season. Or if you're in an area that doesn't have fresh cane growing in abundance nearby, you can get syrup from an area that does, bring it to a distillery, dilute it, ferment it, distill it, and drink Clarin, and everyone's happy. So La Roche is one of the few distilleries that has a name. Romulus Bethel is the brother of a priest. His distillery he named after the Bible parable of Matthew 7:24-27. I just have to look that up. It's the parable of the wise man and the fool. So the fool builds his house on the sand. The wise man builds his house on the rock, La Roche, the rock. So it's an ode to his religious. He's a very religious man. This is Romulus Bethel. And this is the syrup. So after it's boiled down, it looks like this. Kind of looks like molasses. But it's a little bit different in raw material and flavor profile. And this is an interesting distillery because they're making rum from syrup, but they're also using dunder in their fermentation. So it's also sort of this historical reference point from a place in time where, because like what we talked about before, because Jamaica rum, because Trelawney rum was creating such a value of their distillate because it was so sought after, and the British were making such incredible wealth off of their Jamaica super funky high ester distillate. The French essentially got jealous and wanted a piece of that action. So in the mid 1700s, the French invited some Jamaican distillers to come to Haiti to teach the Clarin distillers how to make high ester Clarin. So La Roche, if you guys have tried it, it's super, super intense. It's like really, really concentrated, lots and lots of depth of flavor. And that's because it's a reference point to a place in time where Jamaicans came to Haiti and taught them how to use dunder in their fermentation. So this is a kind of like a Jamaican Haitian love child, but this looks just like a Jamaican distillery because it basically is. 1804, the Haitians declared independence. Maybe the Jamaicans stayed around, maybe they went back, I'm not sure. They killed all the French, but in this little pocket, in this region around Pignon, their tradition is to use dunder in their fermentation, just like Jamaica. So they're producing a much, much higher ester Clarin style, and it's very much like this. If you guys have tried it, like, it's very different than the other Clarin because they're using syrup and because they're using dunder in their fermentation. So they take the syrup and they blend it. If you can kind of see in this picture, there's a pole with a basket on top. and they'll put the syrup into the basket. So this guy will jump up onto this ledge, pour it into the basket, and all of the blending is done by gravity. So the basket has these long poles that go to the different blending tanks. So the dunder will come out of the still, go into a pit, they'll scoop that out, they'll put it into these kind of baskets on top of these poles, and the liquid will move around the distillery by gravity, which is super, super cool. But it looks very, very different than a lot of the other Clarin distilleries like this. The still is more or less the same. It's the pot still encased in the concrete box with a short little column. This is the still here, that little column behind it. They have the shelf of on for the preheating like the other ones, but it's kind of a completely different style. So this is my boss Luca with Casimir, Sajus, and Laval. This is sort of the first of this project. So when Luca arrived in Haiti, he got absolutely crazy for Haiti. He was there more, I think, than he was actually in Italy, in Genoa, where he lives, because everybody told him that Haiti is dangerous and don't go there. And when he arrived, he was so delighted to find this real authentic old way of production for local consumption. Clarin isn't a commodity there. It's just real life. It's just produced and consumed as real life. So he drove around. He's tasted Clarin all over. Some of it incredible, some of it meh. You know, with 500, there's a huge spectrum of the quality of Clarin as well. And he found at first these three guys who were interested in starting this project, the Spirit of Haiti, along with the Lingue family in Port-au-Prince. So the liquid is collected from their distilleries. They feed their local village first, and then they'll put aside a little bit of distillate in 55-gallon drums. When they have enough drums to fill a truck, the truck comes down to Port-au-Prince, and it's collected at the Lingue's family compound there, where the Spirit of Haiti is located. And so the bottlings of the juice rums of Sajus, Laval, and Casimir are all a bottling of a single harvest season. So they're all vintage dated as a harvest. So we blend the harvest together, but it's not filtered or fined or diluted. And then we release it as a single harvest. La Roche is a little bit easier because they can produce all year round. They don't have to, not being produced from juice, they don't have to abide by the harvest season. So it's a little bit easier to produce more of. But the liquid that comes into the bottle for the first time ever, I mean, if you think about the spirit being produced for 300 years, and this is the first time it's ever been put into a bottle with a label and sold on a shelf, starting in Europe in 2012, starting in the US in 2018, it's absolutely incredible. I love that this story of Clarin is still telling itself as the story of Haiti, going from a local spirit to seeing bartenders all over the world mixing with it for the first time, making all these really creative cocktails and ways to showcase how different the spirit is. I wish I really had like a camera and had kept track of everybody's face the first time that you try it. Coming from the bartender world myself, you kind of start to think that like you've kind of tasted everything or you have a sense of everything. So to have a completely new to us spirit, even if it's a very old spirit in the world, but to have a completely new flavor profile that's so unexpected and so dramatically different across producers is super exciting. So we just started launching in the US in 2018, but the company's been around since 2012 in partnership with the 3 and now 4 with La Roche producers and with a family in Haiti to be Clarin, the Spirit of Haiti. Do you know anything you want to add?
Well, there's a never-ending conversation, I feel like, about Haiti and Clarin, but we're over 2 hours in. So I just think it's one of the most unique and beautiful places I've ever visited in my life. the people are so friendly, and it's I think it's a representation of one of the few representations of what life was like at one point on Earth, and things to appreciate going forward. But yeah, I love it. I love it. I love everybody involved in it. It's quite amazing. It's quite amazing. There's nothing quite like it. On that last thing you sent me with Luca, someone asked him if he thought there was anything untouched yet, and when it comes to rum, and Luca was a very quick no. There's nothing left. I've gone everywhere, which I thought was interesting. And yet we're only kind of just beginning to rediscover Clarin, and there's so much more to discover just within Haiti alone. So
Yeah,
I hope we're gonna do one with Luca at some point too as well. You were working on that?
Yeah. I'm just waiting for the confirmation email from
Cool.
him with when, but I'm really excited. I know that he's been doing some kind of webinars around Europe, so I was really hoping, you know, Gino, you're really one of the only people in the US who's really met him and got to spend some time with him, and he's just such a charismatic, full of love and energy, really special human. So I'm really hoping that someday, obviously not this year, we'll get to have Luca in the market and a lot of you can meet him. But until then, we'll have to do it virtually. So
yeah, and there's lots of video online. You can watch interviews with him, watch presentations he's given. You can get a vibe for what his whole thing is about, because there's many layers to the projects that he has that I find incredibly fascinating. The lens he views the world in.
Absolutely.
Kate, thank you so much for digging into this.
So
we probably should have divided it up into a couple of sessions.
Yeah.
but yeah, just amazing, all the knowledge to share with everyone, and we'll keep this and send it out so people can watch it on their own time as
awesome.
well.
Thank you so much for having me. I really miss you guys, and I hope that I get to come back to the US at some point and find it.
Shit, Kate, I forgot to ask. Someone asked about Boston area shops, mail order. I don't know who does your distribution in Boston or
We don't have Boston distribution yet. I was literally expecting my very first order the week that all of this craziness went down. So as soon as it's viable for them to place an order, we will have New England distribution ASAP. I did a training with their team. They're all pumped. They're all ready. We're totally good to go. We're just waiting for the world to get a little bit less crazy.
So in New York, you've got PM Spirits.
Yeah.
Somehow you can get a bottle probably from someone in New York.
I think
Aster carries it.
Yeah.
And then Communal. There's a question about Communal, which is a blend of how many of the producers?
Four of the distilleries. Yeah. It sort of functions as our mixology Clarin. So the bottle's a little bit lighter. It doesn't come in the gift box. It's a little bit more price posed for making cocktails with, and it's a blend of all four producers. We had some things happen last year where we had to remove Casimir from the market. And then La Roche sort of came in, and then just with figuring out how to sort of grow and get liquid, we had some gaps where we didn't have some of the producers. So this year I was really hoping to have all four producers in the market for a full year to really allow people to understand the differences between the producers and get used to having all of them. And then Communal was planned to launch in January of 2021. I think that that's still the plan. Obviously, we weren't expecting we're supposed to have Casimir back already, but the world has delays, and what you gonna do? So as soon as we sort of have all of the producers in the market together for a little bit of time, then hopefully we can launch Communal. It's totally delicious. I love seeing it around Europe being used in bars and everything, but soon come in due course.
And sorry, there's like one more question that someone asked a little while ago, and I forget who asked, but they asked if aged Clarin is still considered Clarin, and like what are the...
Yeah, totally. So as I said before, basically any cask that we empty gets shipped over to Haiti and filled sort of as experimental projects to see what happens. So when we empty Carigny casks and BL casks and Jack Daniel's casks, Buffalo Trace, Cognac, there's a really, really wide variety of casks that get shipped to Haiti, and we fill them with Sajus and Laval and Casimir and La Roche, kind of to see what happens. Sometimes even coming off of the still is as strong as it's essentially going to get, kind of. But even if it's, 44%, that's quite low to be putting into a cask. So these are really, really experiments to see what happens when you age Clarin. So the sort of notion is that when Clarin ages and you still feel the raw material with an influence of the oak, it's Clarin, we call it Clarin Ancien or Clarin aged. We do have a release that's coming out in Europe that's called Vieux Sajus, and this is 4-year-old Sajus that's been aged. And in this, you feel the power of the focus is on the wood and not the raw material. So this is rum. So the Clarin Ancien are all fairly lightly aged so that you can still feel the raw material. You can still feel the difference of the sugar cane. You can still feel the fermentation, the funkiness of it. And we feel that when the oak starts to influence it after too long, then it becomes rum and it's no longer Clarin Ancien. So it's definitely a delicate thing. It's totally all experimental, but they're really fun to try. Again,
Are there other...
But there's no one in Haiti drinking aged Clarin.
Okay,
No.
yeah, that was...
No. They even have a saying that kind of goes along with it.
Yeah, well, also you don't want to wait, right? Like you drink the spirit off of the still. I ain't got time to sit around and wait for that to age. I got Clarin to drink. Yeah, so it's super experimental as a project that we're doing just to see what happens.
Cool.
But the results are pretty delicious as well.
For sure.
Awesome. Well,
thanks, Kate.
Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, guys.
It's amazing. Thank you, everyone, for coming. I know we've lost some people, but that was amazing, Kate. Beyond expectations.
I really miss you guys. I hope to see you as soon as possible. But thank you so much for putting this together. And if anyone has questions, comments, wants to follow up, our social media we have for Hampton at Hampton Estate Rum, Clarin, the Spirit of Haiti on Instagram and Facebook. Habitation Velier is habitation.velier. You can find me when in rum with an H, RHUM. Shoot me an email, find me on Facebook. I love questions and conversations, and I love to talk about rum. So if anybody wants to reach out, I'm more than happy to chat as much or as little as you like. So thank you so much for having me. Thanks for putting this together, guys.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone.
Bye, thanks.